Hey, Jim, is that a new background you have behind you?
No, it's the same one I've always had. But I did want to show you these. I completely forgot I had these. And then my son picked them up off the shelf the other day. I was at a Lego convention, of all things, a couple years ago, before the dark times, before COVID. And some seller, I don't know who it was, because I don't want to out them because it's illegal. But they made these Lego minifigures that are actually from the original series. It's Bele and Lokai from I think what's the episode? Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, I think.
My favorite episode. It's the first one my dad ever showed me.
And like this company did like a handful of different Star Trek minifigures, and I was like, these are so awesome. And like I can't find them anywhere now. Like I've looked on eBay and I can't find that guy anymore. But they're actual Lego minifigures. But he custom printed the torsos and the faces and stuff. And I was like, so I don't know if I can get a really good shot of them. But there's Lokai and Bele. And anyway, I had those on my shelf. So the background's the same as ever. But
that was the first episode. I must have been 4 or 5 years old that I watched with my dad. He explained to me, he says, this is why racism is stupid.
Yeah.
And he was like, watch it. And I'm like, the whole time I couldn't figure it out until, of course, Act 3. I'm not going to ruin it for anybody on that. But everyone probably saw that episode, I hope.
Yeah. And is that a new background for you, or is that the same one you've always had?
So this is the brig. So this is the brig on a Voyager class, an Intrepid class starship.
It is?
So, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the brig, or it's the office of.
Oh, it's the office. Okay, yeah, it looks a little bit like Odo's office. I was like, why would you give a prisoner that much information on the walls?
Well, if I stand like this, wait, hold on, no, yeah, if I stand like this.
Oh, you're in the brig. Okay,
exactly.
You're in the brig, looking out into the office. Okay, exactly. I got it.
So maybe I should film the whole thing like this today.
There you go. I get it.
A little bit more realistic.
I get it.
Okay, and I'm wearing my Settlers of Catan shirt, of course.
Oh, very nice.
One of my favorite.
Very nice.
Of all time. And for those of you who are tuning in, we are not here talking about Catan or Legos, even though if you are invested in Legos, you'll probably make more money than the stock market.
Yeah, sure.
The purpose of this podcast is to talk about Star Trek Adventures, and this includes announcing latest releases, highlighting professionals and fans associated with the game, explaining game rules and mechanics, which is super helpful for new game masters, and explaining how to be a better GM or a better player. I'm Michael Dismuke. I'm a freelance writer for Star Trek Adventures, and I'm a contributor to Continuing Mission, which is the #1 fan site for Star Trek Adventures game this year, or excuse me, by the time this comes out, it'll be last year. So in 2021, we hit almost 500,000 views with 80,000 unique visitors. So we do it as an act of love, and we just pump up the game. We don't like our favorite games to end. And then today we have with us Jim Johnson, project writer, gamer, and Star Trek Adventures project manager, the person who puts the energy and brings all this talent together to make it happen. How you doing, Jim?
Doing all right, Michael. Thank you so much.
Okay, good. So we are into chapter 6 of the Gameamaster's Guide, which was released in fourth quarter 2021. And this one's packed with so much. We only can give an overview. There's so much gold in here, and it's called main engineering. Why is it called main engineering, Jim?
Well, the conceit is that this chapter is all about new mechanics. It's all the crunch. It's all the stuff that some fans have been looking for. It's taking the existing rule set and just how's it work? How's everything come together? And main engineering just seemed to fit as a concept.
And really, I mean, it was basically about 4 years of chatter and questions and ideas that formed this chapter, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Star Trek was one of the first 2D20 systems that came out, and 4 years ago, like there was Conan, there was Infinity, and then there was Star Trek. And in the 4 years, we've released even more versions of 2D20. And in the 4 years that the game's been on the market, right, people have been playing it. People have been asking questions. And Nathan Dowdell, the system designer, he is really generous with his time. Like I kind of shadow him on a bunch of different message boards, and somebody will ask a question about the game system, right? And he'll go on for paragraphs explaining his thought process and his concepts of like how that rule should be working in practice. And finally, we had an opportunity to do a book. And I went to Nathan and I said, okay, all that stuff you've been posting on the internet about all these rules and how they should work and everything, let's codify it and put it into a book that you couldn't get into the core book because we didn't have enough time to do it. So that's what this is for the most part, especially this chapter. Go ahead.
No, so what I want to call this is the FAQ. So if you go through the core rule book and you pop up some questions, I'm betting they're answered here in this FAQ with plus some. That's what I thought of when I looked over it in there. Okay, so let's talk about the general overall topics, and maybe what we'll do is take we'll go piece by piece. So why don't you talk to us about the highlights of the tasks section, Jim?
So tasks are really the meat and potatoes of the game, right? Like that's what your characters are doing. You get into a story, you're trying to solve things. What are you doing? You get a task, you get discrete specific things to attempt with your dice rolling. That can't be accomplished just by the game master narrating it or dropping you a piece of information, right? You're trying to accomplish something. You're trying to wheedle some information out of the Ferengi bartender, or you're trying to depolarize the isolinear chips, or you're trying to do something that has a real honest risk of failure, right? And that's what a task is all about. And so we just provided a few pages of information about what's a task, what isn't a task, what's important, how does your threat and momentum and determination impact that task. So we just try to bring more clarity to what a task is and what you can do with it.
Awesome. All right, and then we go even further in chapter 6.2 about extended tasks. And the way I like to view these are a chain of events that must happen in order for success. So whereas you have one single task, extended tasks come in a variety of different ways. It's explained here, and what I like, there's a box on page 162 that talks about social extended tasks too, meaning that one big thing that happens in Star Trek a lot, and I know in my game it happens, is diplomatic negotiations. And if anyone watches politics, there's no treaty that's signed in one hour. Research has to be done, side deals have to be struck, agreements have to be made, and that I really appreciated the social extended task box here, so that when people are going into social conflict, there's suspense and maybe days of suspense in order to make something happen. So I thought that was really cool that you included that in here.
Yeah.
What about momentum? Why did we have to expound on momentum?
Well, I think momentum is one of the key mechanics of the game, and it gives players an opportunity to manipulate the scenes and what's happening in the scene, whether you're spending momentum to create advantages or traits or gathering more information. Like there's ways that a player can manipulate the metagame to some extent, and other games you can't really. You're really just kind of relying on GM fiat and your own ability to negotiate with a game master to make something happen. And this gives players kind of a concrete way of spending points to do something cool in the moment of that scene or that encounter or whatever. And so we provide more guidance in this subchapter about why does momentum matter and how do you use it, and be, especially for players, be willing to spend it. Like I know a lot of newer players to the game are really risk adverse and want to hold on to it as long as they can. Not realizing that you can gain momentum a lot over the course of an episode, and it's okay to spend it. Like the whole game is kind of encouraging you to spend it regularly to gather information and whatnot so that you can proceed along. It's not really that difficult to gain more momentum. And in fact, you have a cap of 6 for your group. So, gain it, but then spend it, do stuff with it, be dramatic, be interesting, be cool, do interesting things. And so we're just trying to provide a lot of guidance on like how to use it as written, and also provide a few new ways to use momentum, basically.
Yeah, my bumper sticker: make things happen with momentum. So don't like, what do I do? Use momentum and create the story yourself. The opposite of momentum is, of course, threat. So we expound on threat. I have to say my favorite piece of this chapter was a new homebrew rule that you could incorporate into your game on page 170, and that's if your players are dithering, meaning that they're forever to come up with a decision. You could actually stir them into action by saying, hey, you know what, if you take more than 5 minutes to make this decision, I'm going to add 1 point to threat or 2 points to threat. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. I don't have that happen too much on my online game, but I've been around the table when people are in analysis paralysis. And so I thought this was a beautiful rule. In addition, there's some additional things brought out about causality, proportionate resistance, and using it, adding threat to the narrative. So creating tension through accumulation of threat. I mean, you don't have to spend it a lot of times. My players freak out because I'll hold on to it. I held onto 41 threat, because I needed them to know that this subspace life form was going to kill them if it catches them. And I had enough threat to back it up. So in game turns, that made them look at their sensors and their navigation and be like, we cannot beat this thing. We have to escape. We have to retreat. And I thought that was cool that was written into this section about really how to use threat to push the tension in the game.
Yeah. And I think, I don't remember I'm sure it's in here somewhere, but it's also in the core book, whichever core book you're using. It's just to try to give a little guidance to game masters about what exactly threat is and why you should be using it. And I know that there's been a couple of ongoing conversations on a couple of the different Star Trek Adventures, forums and discussion sites about like old school game masters coming in and saying, well, why would I use threat when I can just make it up and just do whatever I want anyway, right? And just say, well, this is how I've been game mastering my entire life. I just say something's going to happen and it happens. And it's like, well, yeah, you can do that, but using threat kind of puts structure around it and kind of gets away from that GM is God concept of like, the players are fighting against the game master. Like you don't want to have that adversarial relationship. And so having momentum for the players and threat for the game master kind of keeps them on a certain level of parity and trust, right? Like you can trust your game master. Like, if something's going to crazy is going to happen in the game, it's because they're spending threat. They're just not making it up off the top of their head.
Well, it prevents the accusation, like we talked last episode about railroading too.
Yeah.
If you use your threat right, you never have to railroad because you're saving your threat to push the encounters and the scenes that you want to happen. And the players can't really argue with it because you had the threat to do it. And even though we're not going to go into detail, it breaks down paragraph by paragraph the different ways you can use threat to push your story along. So a very valuable chapter that you can cut and paste to players who might be in tears as you push your story along. Okay, then we go on to talking about attributes and disciplines in chapter 6.5. What are your highlights about that chapter?
Big highlight here really is just we're taking the explanations of attributes and disciplines. Those are the core concepts of the core components of characters, right? Every character has 6 attributes and 6 disciplines. Every starship has 6 systems and 6 departments. They're all related. And the great thing that Nathan built into, or one of the great things that Nathan built into this system is that it's not like there's not one combination for every possible task, right? You can take these 6 attributes and these 6 disciplines and combine them in different interesting ways, so that one character might approach a problem using like reason and command, but another one might approach the exact same problem using daring and engineering or something, right? So like it's all contextual, it's all character focused. I love the fact that it's just so I don't want to say modular, but it's so flexible. Like if you created an interesting, cool character and you're like, no, I would probably be using daring in this case. The game master's like, okay, do it. Use daring. Play to your strength and make it fit the narrative. And so we just try to provide more guidance in this chapter about what the attributes and disciplines are and mean and how they're defined, because they don't map nicely to other attributes and disciplines in other game systems, right? So like you can't necessarily take the traditional 6 attributes from like Dungeons and Dragons and map them perfectly to Star Trek, because it's just 2 very different milieus, genres, like whatever you want to call it. So we're just trying to provide more guidance and insight into what we mean by these components.
Yeah, well, Star Trek is a very cerebral game, and so I love that these disciplines and attributes reflect that mentality of the game. And then again, values and determination. Anybody who's played RPG with me knows I love values. I think that is the contextual material from whence game masters can now draw plot hooks because these values are the drivers that your players have selected during session 0 when they form their characters. And so I really appreciate this chapter talks about how to use those values in order to pull the right strings at the right time. And then how the players can spin determination in order to not only invoke values in a positive way, but one of my favorite things is when I really do train my players, use them in a negative way. Show us your weaknesses and your dark side, because that's going to drive the story way more than values in a positive way. So I really like this chapter that expounded on that and gives a lot of examples on how to use it in different circumstances. There's actually examples. So for me as a visual learner, I loved having those examples there. What about traits?
So moving on to the next subchapter is traits. Traits are just a neat little mechanic that is built into the system where you just, it could be a scene trait, it could be an environmental trait, a character trait. There's just it's just a thing that is either true or not true, right, about a thing. And it can have an impact on the story, because it could, an environmental trait could be it's raining. Right. And so everything you do in that scene has to be colored by the fact that it's raining. So if you're trying to run and chase a Klingon diplomat, then, it's raining. So how does that color your description or your tasks, or does it, provide a bonus or a negative or something? So it's just different. It's an easy mechanic. It's a really lightweight mechanic that you can use to color things and make them more interesting. Like maybe your ship is the flagship of the fleet. Right, that's a trait that you can plug onto it, and that might have a role-playing element. Like it may not have a mechanical effect, but it's going to be important to the story, because not only are you on the ship, but you're on the flagship, and that matters to certain people, and it might matter to the story or to whoever you are, facing off against across the view screen. And traits are things that both game masters and players can create by spending threat or momentum, and this is just a great way for clever players, especially clever players, to manipulate the game to their advantage, or even if they really want to, they can do it to their detriment, right? Like I was fortunate that I had a really good mature group of players in my glass game who would often remind me, spend threat to make an advantage or a disadvantage, because I would say something in the course of the narrative, and they'd say that should be a trait. And I'd be like, you're absolutely right. I'll spend 2 threat and make that trait and plug it right in. And it made it harder for them, but it just added to the texture of the scene, And so that's just what traits are. And it's such an easy mechanic to use. And I don't see a lot of people talking about traits enough online. So I would hope they read this chapter and get some ideas and maybe play with that a little bit. I'm
going to give a shout out, I think, to one of my players. And it was either Michael Freeman or Josh Allen. They both do it to me, and they do similar with the traits. But they're like, set the scene. It sets the scene. One big rule that many people forget is every time you switch scenes, as a game master, without even spending threat, you can put new traits in. And so read the book to get that detail about how to work that in. I think that was game changing for me, for sure.
Sure.
Cool. Then we go into defining a little bit about conflict in chapter 6.8. And I thought this was such a good chapter because, for those of us who played different RPGs before being introduced to Star Trek Adventures, conflict oftentimes meant physical violence. And that's not the case in Star Trek. I think about one of the conflicts that our players had once is that they were in a relationship, and the ensign ended up commanding the starship. The doctor, who was not in command of the starship, who she was in a relationship with, countermanded her order because he didn't feel she had enough experience. And it ended up, that was a conflict, that disagreement there. And it was quiet. They kept their professional demeanor, but they broke up after. And that conflict is carried into 3 subsequent games because they're kind of side-eyeing each other and not being, and I'm like, wow, this is actually more interesting than the photon torpedo battle. Yeah. And so this chapter talks about that conflict is in every story and it takes many forms. Have you found that true too?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I love that Nathan delineated between personal combat and starship combat and social not combat, but conflict, right? Using conflict instead of combat, because conflict is drama, right? And drama is story. And you can have 2 people in a room arguing, and that conflict is as compelling as the pew pew going on in space overhead, right? I mean, in fact, maybe even more so, because 2 ships battling out is kind of, there's a bit of a distance there for the most part, unless you're really invested in the ship. But you got two characters that you know and care about going at it, verbally. It's like, oh, what's going to happen? Oh, what's happening here? Like, I think about Duet from DS9. You got, the guy playing Goldar Heel and Kira, and like they're both so invested, and it's so important to them what's happening. It's like, whoa, I could watch this all day. It could be they could be in a cardboard box having this argument. It would still be compelling because the setting doesn't matter. It's just the characters doing great stuff, and that's what conflict is all about. And I think that's what this chapter really tried to get at, is that great Star Trek stories aren't just about combat. It's not just about battling each other out and duking it out into the bitter end. It's like, how do you play with conflict in all of its different flavors to bring out a really cool Star Trek story.
Well, what's funny is, you've hit before we move on, you hit the gold spot in your game when you're having like two characters who are having an argument and they're mad that they have to get into a phaser battle with Klingons because they need to resolve this argument right now. So that's, the gun battle. They're like, can we just get these Klingons out of the way so that we can, yeah. That's when you've mastered conflict in your game at that level. All right, and so let's get to the last chapter, which in my opinion, I thought was the most controversial for over the last 4 years, Jim, in my experience with the game. And this was about the scientific method. What does this clarify, this chapter? Why should we look forward to it?
Yeah, I think one of the common questions over the years is like, what is the scientific method? And it's like, what do we do with this? We don't really get it. Is it an extended task? Is it a task? Is it something else? Like, what is it? And so we just tried to think about that a little bit and try to provide more insight into like, what exactly is the scientific method and how would you use it? And I think we dropped in a couple of examples here to say, like, at its heart, Star Trek is a science fiction show, and science, theoretically, depending on what era you're playing, science is what Starfleet is all about. The Federation wants Starfleet out there exploring the great unknown and discovering new things. And everybody, I mean, for the most part, every Starfleet officer has some sort of grounding in science and would understand the scientific principles of, like, you're faced with a problem. There is the scientific method is a structured process to start solving that problem. And if you fail, that's fine, because now you've got more data, and then you start over again and you continue it on. So we just tried to provide more guidance in here about the scientific method, just to see if it would resonate, right? Like, we're not telling people how to do it right or how to do it wrong. We're just trying to give you more information about how to play with it. And hopefully the clarifications help, but we'll find out.
Well, no, you'll be happy to know that after this chapter came out, I, for the first time in my game, introduced the scientific method, and they're loving it.
Okay.
They're loving it. And one of the key notes I'll give to people is I've chosen to use it over a length of time. So there's a mystery. We're playing, of course, the Shackleton campaign. And there's a mystery that I will let them figure out once they do, yes, literally months of research, collecting data through each mission, and then there'll be a resolve. So we treat it differently. So to me, it was groundbreaking, this article, and I don't have to question anymore about it after 4 years. So it did its job. And actually, Michael, you hit on a great point, and that's something that I've really tried to do in my games. Like before this game, before Star Trek Adventures came out, my group and I would use a lot of homebrew Star Trek games, because none of the ones that came out really quite hit the sweet spot of the way we wanted to do Star Trek. And I always wished I had some sort of mechanic where, like, if I present the players with a really interesting conundrum or mystery that I wanted to stretch out over the course of a season, I didn't really have a good mechanical way of telling them, okay, you accomplished this part of it in this episode, but you won't be able to get to it again until a couple episodes later. I didn't really have a good structure for that. So it was really kind of squishy and kind of like arbitrary, that I was just I would drop breadcrumbs along the way and make the best of it. But having the scientific method and also extended tasks gives game masters the tools to where, if you want your player characters to have a season spanning mystery, make it an extended task, and you can just dribble it along gradually, and they can actually mark off their progress, right? They can mark the progress boxes or whatever, and the scientific method can help them get to certain gateways of completion and work their way through it, so they can see they're making progress, or they'll fail and then start over again, or whatever. Right. But that's the point that you hit the nail on the head there, is they feel like they're doing the work. They feel like they're on a starship working week after week, as Starfleet officers are. They're scientists, they're engineers, and they're not getting instant solutions like that. They're putting their work in and understanding. What I do is I build out so that each scientific method completed, or each extended task breakthrough completed gives them some knowledge, like you said, some data that is going to help them by the time they're going to learn something even through failure. Yeah. And that's how I use it. Cool. All right. Finally, why don't you talk to us about the last chapter, section 6.1, creating and using NPCs.
Yeah, so this is just a little bit. This subchapter is just a little bit more advice and insights on creating interesting and effective non-player characters. Right. So like your player characters are the stars of the show, of your Star Trek show, and the non-player characters are all the adversaries or supporting characters, or like all the things that all the people they encounter along the way. And there's a certain amount of art and strategy into how to create a interesting non-player character. We've even included some random tables, like if you need some quick goals or tactics for your NPC, you just roll D20 and pick something off the list if you want, or just grab one that you like. I know a lot of game masters really like random tables, especially if they need to build something quick. I wish we had the space to drop in a couple pages of random names, because like I'm horrible with names. Like in the moment, I just cannot create names for the life of me. Yeah, we just try to provide more advice here on how to make interesting player characters. And
my favorite piece
jump in from there.
Yeah, one of my favorite pieces was the new NPC special rules. I have to highlight one of my favorite new special rules was interphasic on page 203. Constantly shifting through different dimensions, or their molecules scatter and reassemble at will. I was like, oh, I mean, again, there's other ones that are really good in here too, but that one was like, oh man, just knowing that I can create an NPC and there's a little description of how it works. Yeah. I thought that was super cool. I think that was inspired by Enterprise, if I'm right. A lot of interphasic people in that one. And again, a couple other things that were not in the original core rulebook were swimming and drowning, vertical movement and falling. So that was really cool to see the advice on that. Anything else you want to highlight before we wrap up our highlight chapter about chapter 6?
No, just generally this whole chapter about the main engineering. There's just a ton of stuff in here, a ton of nuggets of gold, and don't feel like you need to read it from beginning to end. I'd say if there's like one mechanical component of the game that you're a little uncertain about, read that subchapter. Read the chapter on momentum, or read the chapter on threat, or read the chapter on NPCs. Like do it in bite-sized chunks as opposed to trying to absorb everything. Because like even after 4 years, I'll be honest, I don't remember all the rules in the game either. Because like I'll flip through the core book from time to time and be like, that rule's in there? I didn't know that. I forgot all about that rule. So just take it a little bit at a time. Add it to your game as appropriate, and continue to have fun.
Totally true. Totally true. So 2 last shout outs before I walk out and hand the mic to you. One is the art on page 204 and 205 with species 8472 kicking some Borg booty. I love that art, by the way. The art in this book is phenomenal. I thought that one was beautiful. And then as usual, as tradition dictates now, we're going to shout out a game shop. So Benjamin Sloan, a Star Trek fan from our Facebook page, he goes to Fox Comics and Games in Marion, Illinois. He says they've been open for 15 years, so that's awesome. We love these long-standing brick and mortars. He shouts out the excellent staff. So Benjamin, make sure to push this video to them and let you know that you're loving them. And he's been running D&D there for 3 years and a certain Star Trek game for the last year. So Star Trek Adventures, of course. And he says that there's really good game masters coming out of that store. So please breed more game masters out of Fox Comics and Games in Marion, Illinois. All right, Jim, pass the mic to you.
So I'll send out a thank you to Games Quest in the United Kingdom, and to Flat River Group, Impressions, and Fun Again Games, all here in America. They are the primary Modiphius distributors who start getting the stuff out to stores and to markets. I just want to say thank you to all of them for all the hard work that they do. That is often unappreciated, because like with COVID, it's ridiculous what kind of challenges the logistics teams are having about just finding drivers for trucks and forklifts and just getting stuff out of the boxes and out into distribution. So I know it's been hard, and I know that your average fan doesn't always understand what the supply chain does and why it's taking so long for their books to arrive. But hats off to everybody involved in the supply chain for doing what they've been doing the last couple of years. Thank you.
Word. All right, everyone, take care, and thanks for tuning in for another continuing conversation. Next week, we wrap up Yeah, we wrap up the Game Master's Guide talking about the amazing additional rules and tools of that guide. All right, we'll see you next week.
All right.
This has been Continuing Conversations, a production of Continuing Missions. Learn more at continuingmissionssta.com. Produced by Studio Tembo. Learn more at studiotembo.com.